simulcast on 101.9 Oshkosh FM Community Radio. If you have no cable TV connection, you may also access this forum by streaming video later on the Oshkosh Media website at www.oshkoshmedia.org or on the Oshkosh Media YouTube channel. I am Kathy Propp, League of Women Voters, your moderator. The League of Women Voters encourages informed and active participation in government. Our mission is to inform citizens about major public policy issues and about candidates seeking office. We do not support or oppose any political party or any candidate. You may find information about our league at www.lwvwinnebago.org. The initial portion of the forum is devoted to Democratic candidates for Wisconsin State Senate District 18 in the August 9 partisan primary election. Mark Harris and John Lemberger are competing to be the Democratic nominee on the November 8 ballot. We regret not being able to host the Republican candidates in District 18. Mark Elliott accepted our invitation, but Dan Fagan is unable to attend. The two primary winners will be invited to another forum in October prior to the November 8 election. Joining me on the panel for this forum are League members Ann Marshall, our co-president, and Frankie Mingling. Our timekeeper will give you cues, and we thank you in advance for keeping your answers short so we can cover as many issues as possible. Audience questions are welcome. If you wish to write one, raise your hand and get a piece of paper submitted in writing to the League representative. Candidates did receive the first two questions in advance. These are opening statements. Each candidate has 1 minute to describe his qualifications and why he is seeking election to the Wisconsin State Senate. We're doing this alphabetically, and we'll start with Mark Harris.
Hi, I'm Mark Harris, and I believe I'm well qualified for a state Senate seat. I have 11 years of experience as a county executive. I've balanced budgets, I've cut spending and taxes, and I'm most proud of the fact that I've reduced the county's debt nearly in half. I've also got 25 years of experience in the private sector as an attorney, a CPA, or a trust banker. I believe I can draw on all of these experiences to be a good state senator. The county executive interacts with the state on many issues, and my time working with the state has given me many insights into the operation of the state budget. I'm running for state senate because I believe the state is underinvesting in education and in infrastructure, and that they're also making policies unfavorable to the environment and to labor. And the only way to stop their agenda is to take back the state senate. Thank you.
John Lemberger.
Hi. First, thanks to the League of Women Voters for organizing this debate. You're a very important part of the democratic process in the state, so thank you. I'm seeking election to the state senate because I believe Wisconsin needs a new path forward. As past president and current member of the Oshkosh School Board, I've seen where the old way has taken us. It's taken us to a state government that puts the interests of big money over the interests of the common everyday people. It has taken us to a state government that's obsessed with power grabs instead of empowering the people. It has taken us to a Democratic Party establishment that responds to the dismantling of Wisconsin's proud progressive tradition with Republican-light alternatives. It has taken us to a Democratic Party establishment that chooses the candidates it wants instead of empowering the voters to choose the candidates they want. I'm a blue jeans Democrat born on the south side of Oshkosh, and I'm on your side, the 99%. I'm seeking a new path forward for Wisconsin.
Thank you. The next question, candidates received in advance. If you are elected, what will be your priorities as the state senator for the 18th district? This time you get 2 minutes, and we'll start with John Lemberger.
Thank you. Wisconsin has had enough of divisive politics. Now it's time to reunite Wisconsin on a new path forward. I envision a new path forward to a living wage for Wisconsin's full-time workers. We have a new class of people in Wisconsin called the working poor. These are people who work 40 to 80 hours per week and still qualify for welfare benefits. On the new path forward, Wisconsin will offer businesses tax incentives to voluntarily raise the wages of their working poor employees to a living wage, something around $15 an hour. And the phrase working poor should become an oxymoron. I envision a new path forward to quality education. As state support for public education has slipped from 2/3 to about half, the difference has shifted to local property taxes. This puts undue hardship on elderly people struggling to live on fixed incomes. That needs to change. Likewise, state support for public universities has dropped from over 50% to around 15%. The difference has been shifted to tuition, and that means students now graduate with tens of thousands of dollars of student loan debt. That also needs to change. On the new path forward, Wisconsin will fund public education from a progressive income tax based on one's ability to pay. I envision a new path forward to clean government. In order to accomplish anything, Wisconsin must greatly reduce or eliminate the influence of big money in Madison. On the new path forward, all members of the state legislature and the state Supreme Court will be required to recuse themselves from voting or ruling on issues that benefits any person or organization that contributed money to their political campaign. We need political leaders who will reunite Wisconsin on this new path forward.
Thank you. Mark Harris, on your priorities.
If elected, my priorities will include reaching across the aisle to work on an increase in the minimum wage that's indexed so it doesn't languish between increases. But it's got to be one that we can get past the governor's veto. I want to find a dedicated source or sources of revenue for transportation needs. I want to work on policies to protect ground and surface water and to replace aging lead pipes that may have corrosion. I believe that we have to do more to control fertilizer and manure runoff, and to protect our groundwater, we need a comprehensive groundwater management plan. I want to restore revenues to the University of Wisconsin, and couldn't agree more with John about the enormous decreases in state support for both the university and the K-12 system. I want to reverse some of the anti-labor policies that have been pushed recently, as well as returning economic development to the Department of Commerce and taking it away from the WEDC. These issues are all spelled out on my website at www.harris4wisconsin.com. Thank you.
Thank you. It's now time for questions from the panel and the audience. We do have a couple of audience questions submitted, but if you want to submit one, please raise your hand, get a piece of paper, and write down your question. We'll start with Ann Marshall.
One question that we have, I don't think you've mentioned, so I'm going to bring that one up. Concern has been raised about the method by which the state legislature has conducted redistricting in 2011 after the last census. Would you support a proposal to develop a nonpartisan process for redistricting in 2021? Such as the independent commission that Iowa uses?
We'll start with Mark Harris.
I think that's an excellent idea. I think the boundaries should be drawn to be logical. Compact districts that respect communities of interest, that follow natural geographic lines. They shouldn't be designed by computers to maximize advantage for partisan purposes, and neither party should redistrict in that fashion. So I think the Iowa Commission is a good way to go about it.
John.
Yeah, I think, again, I was brought up to believe that two wrongs don't make a right, and I think both parties have been guilty of this. Trying to protect the interests of the party instead of serving the interests of the people. And the Iowa plan just points out that we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. There are models out there, and I think Mark and I agree with this. We need to have, in the end, a state legislature that fairly closely mirrors the percent vote cast for each party. So something like that. But again, not politicians shouldn't pick their voters. Voters should pick their representatives.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Frankie, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. And I've heard all these comments on things that are right here in front of me, so I'm going to ask one that didn't come up. Currently in Wisconsin, it is legal for private individuals and unlicensed gun dealers to sell guns without conducting a background check. What is your position on this and why?
We'll start with John.
I come from a hunting family, and I was taught to have a great respect for guns and to be very careful with them. I think that background checks are a good thing. I think most hunters would support background checks. I think it was not too long ago that, well, the point is, yeah, I would support background checks, and particularly on guns that are not designed for hunting, like these sort of pseudo assault weapons that we see. I think they should have very strict background checks on those, stricter even than just if you want to buy a shotgun that's capable of firing 5 rounds versus a AR-15 with a banana clip. That's two different kinds of things.
Mark.
I pretty much agree. I think there should be background checks. If a person with serious mental health issues that are documented, or someone with a violent criminal past can't buy a gun in a gun store, why should they be able to buy the gun without the background check through a private sale or through a gun show? So I think there should be background checks for all gun sales.
Ann, do you have a question?
We have one that came from the audience for you, and the question is, where are you on the right to work issue?
We'll start with Mark.
Well, even the name of that is a misidentification. What the right to work is the right to get bargaining from a union but not pay your share of the dues. And what happens is that some workers aren't paying their share of the dues. Then other workers want to stop paying as well. They say, well, I like my union, but if Joe doesn't have to pay them, why should I pay them? And ultimately, the unions fail for lack of support. So what the right to work really is an effort to undermine unions and to hold down wages, and that should be reversed.
John.
Yes, I think Mark and I are pretty much on the same page on this. Clearly, the attempt to disempower unions, it's been going on in the state now for a while, and it's resulted in lower wages, and that leads to poverty, and I'm very concerned about that. I think we need to re-empower workers. I think it's a universal right to be able to form associations and bargain collectively.
Thank you. Frankie, I think it's your turn.
I'm going back to highways because I have a more specific question. Funding for highway construction has been a controversial issue in state government for several years. We're all aware of the slowdown on construction that is now taking place. Borrowing money, raising fees on gasoline, and vehicle registration are among the options on the table. Now, you both said you wanted to work on this problem, so what would you do to help solve it?
Let's start with John.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think that what's happened is the gasoline tax has gone down over the last 5 or 6 years, maybe a little longer than that, by about 5-6 cents a gallon. Plus, we've got a fleet of vehicles on the road now that's more fuel efficient, so it's not hard to predict that you're going to have some funding shortfalls. I think we need to raise the gas tax back up and then index it to inflation.
Mark.
Certainly, borrowing money to meet our transportation needs or delaying projects that we've identified need to be done is shifting the cost of highway maintenance and construction onto future generations. So we need to take responsibility and take care of it now. I think an increase in the gas tax is a way to do it that captures revenue from both residents and from tourists in the state, and we have a big tourism industry. That may be the best way to do it. Perhaps look at increased registration fees for vehicles that use alternate fuels. For instance, I know there's a trucking company in the area that uses compressed natural gas, and they don't contribute anything towards building or maintaining roads because they're using an alternative fuel. Maybe they could pay a contribution through a higher registration fees on vehicles that don't use gasoline.
Okay. Ann, I think it's your question.
Okay. You both have talked a little about the minimum wage in your introductions. The minimum wage currently in Wisconsin is $7.25 per hour and has been the same since 2009 when the federal government mandated that amount for the entire United States. Milwaukee and Dane counties each put a referendum on the ballot in their counties in 2014 seeking citizen approval to send a resolution to the Wisconsin legislature to raise that amount to $10.10. Both referendums passed by a large margin in those counties. Now, you've mentioned in general what your positions are, but could you elaborate a little bit more how you would see that happening?
I think we'll start with Mark.
I think a referendum is a fine idea, that you could pass a referendum to demonstrate to the legislature what the public intent is. But whether you had a referendum or not, I believe the minimum wage has to be increased. And if someone's working for a 7.25, they can't wait a long time for that increase. They need an increase now. And that's why I'm in favor of a smaller increase that could get past the governor's veto, but one that's indexed to average hourly wages or to some other measure so that the wage would continue to move and not have to wait for years and years for it to be addressed again.
John.
Yeah, I think that a $15 minimum wage should be the target. There's a lot of research on the effects of poverty on children and how their brain develops when they learn. And $15 an hour is about $32,000 a year, which is a good place to be for that, avoiding that problem. I think that any increase in minimum wage is going to face a governor's veto. So what I'd propose is to try to get there is to give businesses tax incentives to raise the wages of their lowest paid employees up to something like around $15 an hour, so it would be revenue neutral for them. And then we wouldn't be paying taxes to support welfare programs because the people making that much wouldn't be qualified for welfare anymore, I think. So we can do some things that are attractive to Republicans. They like to cut taxes and they like to get people off of welfare.
All right, thank you. Frankie, I think it's your question. And we are soliciting audience questions, so please submit them.
You both mentioned the public education system, and I'm going to deal with just PK through 12 on this question. It's one thing to say, yes, we have to do something about it because the state hasn't been doing something for it. But tie in with that, what about the role of private school vouchers? Would you seek to eliminate that or curb it in some way, charter schools, et cetera, et cetera?
John's question.
Yeah. Well, I'm against vouchers. I think that a private school is just that. It's private, and it should be funded through private funds. Public schools, like I said in my opening statement, what we need to get back to 2/3 funding. That was sort of a promise the state made a long time ago, and they've sort of backed off on that. There's a lot of concern out there. Oshkosh has been lucky because we've been able to pass a couple of referendums, but we are one referendum away from a disaster. There are a lot of school districts around the state that aren't going to be as lucky, and we're going to end up with a kind of two-tiered system of the haves and have-nots in Wisconsin, districts that can pass referendums and districts that can't. And of course, sliding this onto the property taxes is not a good idea. Like I said in my opening statement, it puts pressure on people that can't afford.
Mark Harris.
The problem with the vouchers is that they're diverting revenue from the public system, and if you're not going to adequately fund the one system that allows all students to attend, that tries to cater to all of the community's needs, it doesn't make sense to divide that funding between two systems when you're not adequately funding one. We need to roll back the vouchers.
All right, Ann, it's your question.
We have another audience question here. What is your position on the legalization of the sale of marijuana, both for recreational use and/or medical use?
I'm not for legalization for recreational use, perhaps decriminalization, but I definitely think we could legalize marijuana for medical use.
John?
I would reclassify it in the same category as alcohol and tobacco.
Expand
Okay.
a little bit on
Oh, well, I mean, that keeps it out of the hands of minors. They're not allowed to have alcohol and tobacco either. But it would basically make it available to any adult. I think we spend an awful lot of money in time, in effort to chase down recreational users. And marijuana was outlawed fairly recently in our history, so it's not like it's always been illegal. So we spend way too much time and effort on that, and we should be working on more serious crimes.
Okay, Frankie?
Ooh, we have an audience question. In what ways would you address the transportation budget shortfall? And I don't think this is the infrastructure question. I don't know what audience member
That's the
suggested.
same as the one they talked about. Yeah.
Is it? What
think so.
about railroads?
Ask that then.
I like
Public
railroads. Take them all over the country. How about it, guys? Can we get the railroads back? You know, the governor turned that one down. We lost all that money.
This is John's question.
Yeah. No, I think having traveled in Europe and used both car and mass transit, we really need to support mass transit in this country. And yeah, we missed a big opportunity. That was unfortunate. But trains and other forms of mass transit, we need to begin developing that infrastructure. It's very easy to get around in Europe. You jump on a train or a bus and you're there in no time. And here you've got to have a car, you've got to drive places, find parking, and a lot of people don't have money to own a car. So we need to do a better job on mass transit.
Mark?
I think mass transit has its place. It's a terrible shame that we turned down the money and all the jobs that would have resulted from constructing a high-speed rail line, but that's probably water under the bridge. Mostly in the state, though, rail moves freight, and if you've ever had to wait for a 100-car train, you realize how much freight they're really moving and how many additional trucks would have to be on the highway if rail wasn't moving those goods. And rail moves those goods using a lot less energy. So I definitely think we should enhance the rail system, both passenger and freight. And it really is a terrible shame that those funds were turned down from the federal government.
Okay, I think it's Ann's question.
Recent legislation has increased barriers faced by citizens attempting to exercise their voting rights. These include reduced hours for voting early at the clerk's office, changes in the registration laws, the need to present a photo ID, and confusion over just what is it that I need. What are your thoughts about that?
I think this is Mark's question.
I think those are lightly concealed efforts to discourage certain groups of people from voting. And the two groups that will be hit the most are senior citizens that have stopped driving so they don't have a current driver's license, and people who use public transportation, both groups that are expected to break slightly Democratic. And I think all these rules and all these changes are intended to suppress the vote by those people. And I think that's wrong, just plain wrong. Imagine someone who no longer drives that has to rely on somebody else to be transported by auto or to ride a bus. And if they need a voter ID from the driver's license branch, the closest stop in this community to the driver's license branch, you can see it from the bus stop, but it's across 4 lanes of Highway 21. It's completely unreasonable to expect somebody to cross Highway 21 on foot to get a voter ID card. I think most people will find a way to get it done, but it's clearly intended to suppress those people from voting.
John?
Yeah, that's a bad law. We should be encouraging people to vote and not discouraging them. I think I've read somewhere that there was only 1 or 2 actual documented cases of someone that voted more than once. So it's a law that doesn't have there's no problem there. And I think Mark is right. I think it's just an attempt, again, for politicians to try and pick their voters instead of the other way around. So suppressing the vote is one of those tools.
Okay, Frankie's question.
This is also a question from the audience. It's on immigration. Would you support a large contingent of Middle East refugees making their home in Wisconsin? I think there's some
I
here
think that's
already.
John's question.
All right, John.
Yep. Well, we've welcomed refugees in the past from all sorts of places, and I don't see why this would be any different. That's my short answer. And I think that some of the peoples that we've welcomed in the past, like Hmong people, have added a lot of variety and richness to our local culture. So we're an immigrant nation. One set of my grandparents came from Poland and another came from Austria. We shouldn't put barriers up for immigrants, particularly if they're coming from places that are in a state of war and in dangerous places. Yeah, we should give them a refuge. Absolutely.
Mark?
Most long-term residents of this country can trace their roots back to people that came into the country when we had no immigration laws. All you had to do is get here and you could stay. I do think some vetting may be necessary, but most of the people fleeing Syria, for instance, are families trying to get away from a bitter civil war between the Alawites and the Sunnis. To say blanket that you won't take any immigrants from countries that are in turmoil strikes me as being cruel.
Ann, do you have a question?
Well, I have an audience question which I'll kind of add to. The audience says medical costs continue to increase faster than the general rate of inflation. Is there anything you would do about it? Now, in expanding a little on it, we have a strong record in Wisconsin of providing residents access to health insurance coverage, yet disparities continue. Would you support accepting the federal funds available to expand Medicaid in our state? Why or why not?
That's Mark's question.
Well, let me deal with part of that question first. We actually did extend coverage to childless adults.
That's right.
Below the poverty line, but then we curtailed coverage for families that were more than a certain level of the poverty level. And mostly what not accepting those funds has done is shifted the cost off of all of us as federal taxpayers and onto just the Wisconsin taxpayers. So financially it was a bad decision. I think there's a lot of things that can be done about the affordability of health care. Some of them are federal issues, for instance, allowing bargaining over pharmaceutical prices. But there's a lot of things that can be done, and taking the Medicaid money makes perfect sense.
John?
Yeah, I agree. We should have done that. We should have taken the Medicaid money. But I think in a bigger sense, we should follow the lead of Colorado and a few other states and actually push for universal health care in Wisconsin. I don't think health care should be an issue of what class you're in or what your income level is. We all have a basic human fundamental right to health care. And you know, we're great as a people when we come together and support each other through programs like this. So I would push for that.
Okay, thank you. I believe it's Frankie's question.
Ooh, okay. I would like to have you talk something about EPA and the DNR and what things you would like to see accomplished and what things are going on in the state that you don't like, as far as, I know you mentioned the water problem up in Kewanee, and, well, what are you going to do with the Laurentian Plateau? You know, that's a problem there. But what about the large wells that are taking a lot of money and causing certain streams to dry up? And what about people getting the right to build on wetlands? So what would you like to see happen?
And it's John's question.
Wow, I mean,
Sorry.
yeah, I'm not even sure where to start. I think that, you know, I was an intern many years ago for the DNR and the research division, and they have good scientists that study a lot of different issues, and we should empower those people. They have answers to these problems. But in the end, the research is ignored by politicians and that do things for political expediency. Again, going back to what I was saying before about how big money influences decision-making down in the state. But the DNR, you know, is kind of a popular organization to kick around. If, you know, they come and say, well, you can't do that, then people get upset. But I think they're tasked with overlooking the general welfare of the state and the environment, and they have a very hard job. They've been disempowered by the current governor, and that's too bad. I think we need to strengthen the DNR and listen to their research people.
Okay, Mark?
I think the DNR has gone from one extreme where sometimes they seemed almost too tough. I can think of some development that they blocked here in Oshkosh. But now they've gone to a much worse position where they're afraid to enforce their rules against business. And there's pollution that's going to affect the health of people in Wisconsin that's being ignored because they're afraid to stand up to business interests at all. And as far as high-capacity wells that can pump more than 150,000 gallons of water in a day, that does us a lot of harm right here. For instance, in the town of Algoma and surrounding areas, there's high arsenic levels in the ground. And when you draw down the water table, which a high-capacity well would do, that raises the arsenic levels in people's wells. And it isn't just Kewanee County that has fertilizer runoff pollution or E. coli from animal manure in the water. We're discovering that contaminants are prevalent throughout much of Wisconsin.
Thank you. Ann, do you have a question?
Yes. The impetus for this question came from the community or email. The Supreme Court rejected an appeal from Wisconsin of a federal appeals court ruling that struck down the state's law placing restrictions on abortion providers. It was specifically requiring them to have hospital admission privilege in a nearby hospital. That was, the Supreme Court refuses to hear that case as of the end of June. Some state lawmakers pledged new abortion-related bills during the next legislative session once they learn of that. And your opinions, please, on that issue.
Start with Mark.
Roe versus Wade is federal law, and that's where the dispute should take place. The state shouldn't be making up new restrictions to prohibit people from getting procedures that are legal under the federal law. And I think if you really want to reduce the amount of abortion in Wisconsin, you should look at issues like poverty, knowledge of contraception, and other issues that play into that. Imagine you're a woman supporting 2 children and you're barely making it. Your employer doesn't give you any leave for having a child. You don't get paid for any hours you don't work. You're put in the difficult position of making a decision of whether you adequately support the 2 children you have or carry the pregnancy to term. Why are we putting people in that position? We can do better.
John?
Yeah, I think Mark and I agree very much on this. I don't think women get abortions because it's the thing to do. I mean, they get abortions. It's a very serious decision, and it affects their family and their current children, and you know, they're forced by circumstances to do something like that. If we were to outlaw abortion, it wouldn't stop it. I'm old enough to remember before 1973, things went on because of the things Mark talked about. What Roe versus Wade did was to bring it out into the clinical setting where things could be done safely. And so, yeah, I'm very much pro-choice.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and that's Frankie's.
This is from the audience, and I'm going to read it exactly the way they wrote it. Scott Walker was quoted as saying, "Divide and conquer." Do you have a plan for bringing the state back together?
Start with John.
Yeah, that phrase really upsets me because I don't like to think that we're divided, and I certainly don't think anybody wants to think of themselves as having been conquered. We have to stop looking at things from a left to right perspective where you have liberals versus conservatives, and we have to turn that equation upside down or vertically and start looking at things from top to bottom where you have 1% and then you have everybody else and the 99%, and that's really how we need to look at things, uniting that 99% to create the kind of economy that we need in the States for everybody to prosper.
Mark?
Well, you know, I think that comment was made in the context of undermining different parts of labor one at a time. For instance, first they went after the public employees, but it wasn't long after that that they went after the private sector unions. And next it may even be non-unionized employees that will take a hit to the advantage of, as John would call them, the 1%ers. They also have cut different areas of the state budget. First a cut to K through 12, then a big cut to the university system. They're actually talking about repealing personal property tax that would take $265 million away from local governments, cities, counties, and schools. And that's the divide and conquer. They're doing things that wouldn't be publicly acceptable if you talked about them and proposed them up front. But when you do them one group at a time, maybe when it's some other group that's being affected, we don't stand together and fight back.
Okay. Thank you. It's time for closing statements by the candidates, and this time we'll begin with John Lemberger. 1 minute.
Thank you. Tonight you've been offered 2 distinct directions the Democratic Party could take on August 9th. The old direction, the one my opponent offers, is to continue to play the big money game, to continue to offer Republican-like half measures as solutions to problems that demand much more. That direction has taken us to where we are today: underfunded schools, crippling levels of student debt, crumbling infrastructure, public lands up for sale, increasing poverty, and the people of Wisconsin made irrelevant to our state legislatures who are supposed to represent us, but only listen to the big money interests that got them elected. The new path forward will take the influence of big money out of our government and make our representatives work for us again. It will take us to truly effective and progressive solutions to our problems. The new path forward is founded on principles of Blue Jeans Nation, and it will take us to a Wisconsin government of the people, by the people, and for the people. I'm calling on Democrats, Independents, and Republicans to reunite Wisconsin to build this new path forward. Please join our cause and vote for me on August 9th. It would be a great honor to represent you in Madison next year.
Mark Harris.
I'm asking for your vote on August 8th and on August 9th and November 8th, and I would really appreciate your vote. As you can see, There's a lot of similarities in the views that John and I have. But I believe I'm the candidate best situated to win the 18th Senate District in the final election. I have a fiscally responsible record, and I'm socially progressive, in many ways matching this district. And it's clear that the other side thinks the same thing. When Senator Fitzgerald pushed through the Mark Harris bill to try and get me to drop out of the race, that was an indication that he thinks I can win this race. When Americans for Prosperity have already gone out with a deceptive door card, attacking me, going door to door, that's telling you that they think I can win this race as well. And I'm hoping that you will support me in this election. I believe I'm the best candidate situated to win the 18th State Senate District. Thank you.
That concludes this portion of the forum for District 18 State Senate Democratic candidates. 2 Republican candidates, Dan Fayen and Mark Elliott, are also on the primary ballot. On August 9, you must vote a partisan ballot for the political party of your choice. We will resume in a few minutes with Democratic candidates for the 6th Congressional District. Let's give these candidates a round of applause.